Wholesale is over an $11 trillion industry, but most product makers are treating it like an advanced strategy. Meanwhile, my students are landing wholesale accounts in weeks, getting accepted to fair instantly, and seeing reorders within 30 days. And many of them started with no retail background, zero connections, and no fancy retail pitch decks. They just followed my clear system. She Sells Wholesale is opening soon, and if you want consistent revenue that doesn't depend on markets or social media algorithms, get on the wait list. Let's turn your product into consistent, repeatable revenue. Most people read Proverbs 31 and they think of one thing, the perfect wife, the perfect woman that, quite frankly, none of us can live up to. Am I right? But what if we've been overlooking something all along? What if there's something that's been there? And when you really dig into scripture, you'll find something surprising. Because when you really study this chapter, what you'll notice is not a woman that is described that is just managing her household. She's buying land, she's planting vineyards, she's creating products, and then she is selling them at the marketplace. In other words, this passage is quietly painting the picture of a woman that understands her work, her value, and her trade. And so today I'm going to dive into 5 verses in Proverbs 31 that uncover what I like to call the business secrets hidden in Proverbs 31. And by the end of this episode, you might never read this chapter again in the same way. Hi, friends. Welcome to She Sells Differently, the show for aspiring women entrepreneurs looking to overcome the fear of selling and grow thriving businesses from a place of authenticity and confidence. I'm Andy Hart, and it wasn't all that long ago that I was a sales executive for a Fortune 500 company. But I knew in my heart that I was called to use my gifts for something more, something different. That's exactly why I created the She Sells Differently podcast. Each episode is going to deliver you business strategies, tools, and mindset shifts to help set you and your brand apart from our culture's expectations. It's time to elevate your sales and build a profitable, sustainable business you're proud of, one built on integrity, grace, and humility. It's time to learn how to sell differently. So often when we think of the Proverbs 31 woman, we see this impossible list of perfection, this just standard of perfection that we can't live up to. Let's be real. And so we see someone that is waking up early, they are working all day, and then they somehow never get tired. Somehow. I don't know how. But listen, the purpose of Proverbs 31 is not to create this impossible list that we can't live up to. It is to describe a woman of character who uses her wisdom, her discernment, and diligence in every area of her life. And that includes her work. That includes her work. And so I want to look at Proverbs 31:16. It says, she considers a field and buys it. Out of her earnings, she plants a vineyard. And I want to say this again. Out of her earnings, she plants a vineyard. And I want you to think about that for a moment. This is a woman that evaluates opportunity. She makes a financial decision. And then she uses the profits to expand. That's investment strategy. That is investment strategy. She's not passive. She is thoughtful and she is intentional and she is discerning. She sees an opportunity and she is acting wisely. And here's the thing. Scripture is praising her for it. not criticizing her. And often in our Christian circles, women are shut down for this. Scripture here is praising her for it. And that is beautiful. And that tells us something important. Faith and economic activity are not opposites. They are not opposites. They actually go hand in hand. Another one of my favorite verses in Proverbs 31 is verse 19. And it says this: she holds the distaff and grasps the spindles with her fingers. And that's probably a little bit unfamiliar to us today, but in ancient times, that meant that she was producing textiles. And back then, that was cloths, garments, and materials that people needed. And that was a huge trade. It wasn't just a casual hobby back then. And textile work was one of the most valuable industries in the ancient times, in the ancient world. And clothing wasn't mass produced. And so this was a woman that was truly skilled, truly gifted at creating these clothes and these textiles. It required skill, it required patience, it required craftsmanship. And so she was truly uniquely gifted in what she was creating. And so when the passage talks about her working with her hands and creating, it's really highlighting something deeper here. She used those gifts to create things that brought value to others, brought value to the world. And that's a powerful reminder for us today. Every person has abilities that they can use to serve others. And maybe yours is teaching, maybe it's writing, maybe it's building or creating something. And maybe what that does is it helps and serves others, and they need that. And this Proverbs 31 woman in verse 19 reminds us that using our abilities and our skills well is a part of living wisely. One of my favorite verses in this whole chapter is verse 24, and it says, she makes linen garments and sells them and supplies the merchants with sashes. This is so fascinating to me for a couple of reasons. I've read it multiple times, but when I reread this a couple of years ago, it illuminated a few things for me. One, it means that she wasn't just making items for her household to use within her household, she was making them to sell them in the marketplace. Notice that she understood that the things that she created provided value to others. So she was participating in the marketplace and contributing to the economy. Yes, the Proverbs 31 woman was participating in the economy, and she was willing to bring those things to the world. And sometimes people, especially in the Christian faith and the faith community and faith communities, we feel uncomfortable with the idea of selling. And we need to get over that, especially when we have God-given gifts that provide value to others. When we strip away the stereotypes and we realize that selling really is just this. Come back to me now if you've drifted away. I want you to hear this. Selling really is just this. It is offering something valuable to someone who needs it. If what you create solves a problem, if it helps someone, if it encourages someone, or if it makes someone's life better, then sharing it with others is not selfish. It is serving. It is not selfish, it is serving. And the Proverbs 31 woman didn't hide her talents. She used them. And that is beautiful reminder for us to see in scripture that she didn't hide her talents, Something else that's really sweet, especially in this business where I teach product makers how to wholesale their products. I want you to notice in verse 24 that she works with merchants. She takes her products to the merchants. That is actually wholesaling her products there in scripture. So she's making these beautiful textiles and clothes, and then she's going to take them to merchants who are going to resell them in the marketplace. How cool is that that we see a beautiful example of wholesaling in scripture? I love that. When I saw that a few years ago, it just put a smile on my face. And what a grace from the Lord that He just gives us glimpses into our business inside Scripture. I want to rewind just a little bit to verse 20 because this is an important piece of this overall chapter that often gets overlooked when we're talking about a woman or a wife of noble character. But it says she opens her arms to the poor and extends her hands to the needy. And so when we're talking about this woman of noble character and her as a businesswoman, her productivity did not just benefit herself and her household. It created the ability to help and to serve others. And this is an important principle that we see over and over again throughout Scripture. And when people steward their resources and their talents and their gifts well, what happens is it creates a gain that is provides a greater ability to serve. And I love this so much because the Proverbs 31 woman, she wasn't building wealth just for the sake of accumulation and just having more, but she was creating stability for her household, but also extending generosity to others, to those in need. And that's so beautiful. It's a beautiful picture of what I like to call purposeful prosperity. Not wealth for status, not just gaining for accumulation, but resources that allow for greater compassion for others. And as women of faith, we should always be wanting to use our resources and our gifts to enjoy and steward well, but also use for kingdom work. And this Proverbs 31 woman is such a beautiful example of that purposeful prosperity. The last verse I'll highlight is verse 31. It says, "Honor her for all that her hands have done, and let her works bring her praise at the city gate." And in the ancient days, a city gate was a very important place. It's where the leaders gathered, it's where important business decisions were made. And so this scripture points out something important. It says that she was known. She was known at the city gates. It was a center of public life, and the community gathered there. And what she did throughout the community was known by others. And so when the scripture says that her works would bring her praise at the city gates, it means her contributions were not hidden. Her contributions were not hidden, they were visible. And so people saw the fruit of her labor. They saw the impact of her diligent work and the gifts and the talents that she had, her wisdom, her faithfulness. And because of that, she was respected. She was respected. Her work had weight in the community. But there was even something deeper happening here that is easy to miss. And I want to call this out. The passage says her works bring her praise. But it's not because she sought recognition, but because her faithful work naturally produces visible fruit. And when someone consistently lives with wisdom, with integrity, with character, generosity, diligence, and they are working hard with the gifts and the talents that the Lord has given them, people notice. people notice. But even more importantly, the honor and the respect given to her ultimately points back to God, who is the giver of all good gifts. Because every gift she used, every skill she developed, every opportunity that she stewarded was something that first came from the Lord. In James 1:17, Scripture reminds us that every good and perfect gift comes from above. So while the Proverbs 31 woman is honored for her work and what her hands have done, the deeper truth is that her life is a reflection of the goodness and the faithfulness of what the Lord is doing through her, of the one who gave her those abilities. Her work becomes a testimony that wisdom matters, diligence matters, obedience matters, that living faithfully to the work that God has called you to matters. Her recognition is not about personal glory, it's about faithfulness being visible. And when faithfulness becomes visible, it often becomes a witness to others of what a life lived in wisdom and obedience to the Lord can look like. And that is such a powerful reminder for us today. When we use our gifts well, when we steward them well, when we serve people with excellence, when we sell our products in the marketplace, when we work with excellence, when we steward what God places in our hands and in our lives, the recognition may come to us, but the glory always belongs to Him. As we wrap up today's episode, I want you to think about this. I want you to reflect on this. The Proverbs 31 woman and this portion of scripture is not a list of things to try to live up to. It's not a standard of perfection. And thank goodness, because none of us can live up to that. Am I right? She was not praised or honored because she was perfect. She was honored because she was faithful with what the Lord had placed in her hands. Her skills, her wisdom, her giving, her creativity, her work. She didn't hide those gifts. She used them to bless others. She created value. She served. And her impact reached well beyond her home. And so maybe the real takeaway from Proverbs 31 is this: your gifts, they matter. Your gifts matter. And when you use them to serve others, you're participating in something bigger than yourself. You're stewarding what God has entrusted in you. And so before you go today, I want you to ask yourself this question: what gifts has God placed in my hands, and who might they help? What gifts has God placed in my hands, and who might they help? Thanks so much for tuning in today, and I will be back next week with another episode. Until then, I'm cheering you on. All right, that's a wrap on today's episode of She Sells Differently. Friends, it would be a huge blessing to me if you would take 2 seconds to rate and subscribe to my podcast. New episodes drop every Wednesday. Until then, I'm cheering you on in your entrepreneurial journey. See you next time.